Hello and welcome back to the MMA Bar. Today we're going to discuss the story of the MMA GOAT Jon Jones, his rise to being the greatest of all time, and every controversy surrounding his career. The story of Jon Jones is a roller coaster of emotions. Nicknamed Bones, he is the greatest light heavyweight fighter of the UFC and arguably the greatest MMA fighter of all time. Jones became the youngest champion in UFC history with his title victory at age 23. He holds many records in the light heavyweight division, including the most title defenses, most wins, and longest win streak. During much of his championship reign, Jones has been widely considered to be the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. He was never stopped nor outscored during his career. Jones's only professional loss is a controversial disqualification against Matt Hamill. His loss to Matt Hamill is still one of the most controversial decisions in UFC history. In the last 2 minutes of the first round, during which Jones had been dominating Hamill was stuck on his back and Jones began throwing multiple 12-6 elbows at Hamill's nose, a move that is illegal in the UFC due to the severity of injuries that the blows can cause. The fight was originally just stopped and Jones was given a penalty, but due to Hamill dislocating his shoulder, Hamill was awarded the win. President of the UFC, Dana White, has never been one to shy away from speaking his mind. Dana stated that the disqualification of Jones should be overturned. The guy has never lost a fight ever. That one loss on his record, we're trying to get that overturned. The fight occurred in 2009 and as recently as 2019. White was still trying to get the ruling overturned. Jon Jones outside of the octagon has dealt with no shortage of controversies, some due to allegedly taking PEDs before his bout with Daniel Cormier, and even a hit and run back in 2015. But first, let's go over the career of Jon Jones and what has led him to becoming one of the best and most controversial fighters the UFC has ever seen. John Dwight Jones was born in Rochester, New York on July 19, 1987. Jones's father was a pastor and his brother became an NFL player. His dad wanted him to follow in his footsteps, but Jones had other ambitions due to the rising popularity of MMA. Thankfully, he chased his ambitions. Jones started the craft back in high school. He began playing football as a defensive lineman, and his small frame led to his coach giving him the nickname Bones, a nickname that stuck with Jones through his entire career. He then moved to wrestling and quickly realized that he was incredibly talented. He was very quick to submit his opponents. Due to his aggressive and lightning-quick takedown style, he would eventually win his state wrestling championship and go on to wrestle at Iowa Central Community College, where he would win the JUCO National Championship for wrestling. He originally went to college to study criminal justice. He quickly dropped out to pursue an MMA career. Jones's religious parents did not want Jones to become a fighter, and they encouraged him to stop and become a pastor, just like his father, who later stated in an interview, "I wanted him to preach. I tried to discourage him from being a fighter. I told him that you don't want to do that. You can do other things. Be a pastor." None of this mattered to Jones, though. He knew he wanted and could become a great fighter. Jones to this day claims to be a devout Christian and even has a Bible scripture tattooed on his chest. Jones joins the United States Kickboxing Academy, and in just 3 months, he amassed a 6-0 record. Then Jones, with just 2 weeks' notice, was offered a fight in the UFC, and he accepted. At UFC 87, Jones made his debut against Andres Gusmao. After that, Jones had the chance to show his talents on the biggest stage in mixed martial arts. Jones dominated Gusmao, using takedown techniques that nobody had ever seen, combined with elite striking, exceptional use of his elbows, and spinning leg kicks. Jones earned the win by unanimous decision. After 3 wins in the UFC, Jones earned a title shot. Rashard Evans had dropped out of the title fight between him and Shogun Rua that was set to occur in just 6 weeks. Jones was offered the fight and he accepted, even on short notice. The fight between Jones and Rua was a dominant one for Jones. He controlled Rua the entirety of the bout, and the 3rd round, after brutal blows to the head, Jones landed a knee on Rua's jaw and the fight was over. Jones was now a UFC champion, and this was the beginning of the most dominant reign in UFC history. To start his title defenses, he submitted Quinton Jackson and Lyoto Machida in what is arguably the coldest finish to date. Jones battered Machida, and well up against the cage, Jones got Machida in a standing guillotine choke. Machida's whole body went limp and the fight was over. Just like with Jackson, Jones handed Machida his first submission loss in his career. Jones would go on to have a record of 12-1 in the UFC, and he was becoming the sport's biggest star. He had tied Tito Ortiz's record of the most consecutive title defenses at 5. To break the record, he was slated to fight the Swedish phenomenon Alexander Gustafsson at UFC 165. Whether Jones knew it or not, the fight would be the toughest in his career and eventually became the greatest title fight the lightweight heavyweight division of the UFC had ever seen. Gustafsson cut Jones's eye badly during the first round, and it was clear that Jones had met his match. The fight was amazing. Both fighters held control at different times, and they went the whole 5 rounds, something Jones rarely has to do. Jones won the fight by unanimous decision and broke the record for the most consecutive title defenses. Although Jon Jones is widely regarded as the greatest mixed martial artist of all time, he had quite a lot of controversies. Starting in early 2015, Jones would go on to have the worst 3 years of not only his career, but his life. In April of 2015, Jones was involved in a hit and run, and he fled the scene but came back later to his car to retrieve his bong. What made matters worse was the fact that the person he hit was a pregnant woman. Thankfully, both the woman and her baby suffered no serious injuries. Jones was stripped of his belt, which he had held from March 2011 through April 2015. And he was suspended from the UFC indefinitely. The news shocked the UFC and all their fans. Arguably, the best fighter in the sport had just been kicked out. The ban was lifted 6 months after it had been put into effect, and Jones was officially allowed to fight again. His first fight back was supposed to be against his future rival, Daniel Cormier. Cormier had to pull out of the fight due to a foot injury, and Jones would go on to fight Ovince St. Preux, who he would defeat by unanimous decision. Jones was now the interim light heavyweight champion, but to become the official champion again, he was going to have to fight Cormier. Jones vs. Cormier was scheduled for UFC 200, but things got worse for Jones. Jones was removed from the fight due to a potential doping violation. He was then stripped of his title, becoming the first UFC fighter to ever be stripped of a title twice. Jones stated in an interview on Joe Rogan's podcast that he had taken off-brand Cialis pills, which had caused the test to come back positive. He was banned for a year, but upon his return, yet another rematch was scheduled between Jones and Cormier. The two finally fought at UFC 214 of July 2017. Jones won the fight by knockout in the 3rd round after an onslaught of punches to Cormier's head and a brutal head kick to cap it off. Jones had won his title back again. Then, if you didn't think things could get any worse for Jones, they did. After the fight, it was revealed that Jones had failed his drug test. But it wasn't because of Cialis this time. Jones tested positive for Turnbull, which is an anabolic steroid. The fight between Cormier and Jones was officially changed to a no contest. Jones was handed an 18-month suspension. At some point in his career, Jones felt invincible. According to him, he would get blackout drunk a week before every fight. Jones would come back after his suspension at UFC 232, where the world would get one of the most sought-after rematches in the history of the sport. Jones vs. Gustafsson 2. Jones controlled the entire fight. He seemed like he had figured out what Gustafsson's leaks were in his time away. He defeated Gustafsson in the 3rd round by TKO, and yet again, he was the light heavyweight champion of the UFC. Since that fight, Jones has defended his title 3 times, with his last being against Dominic Reyes. After that fight, Bones relinquished his 205-pound title and announced he will compete at heavyweight moving forward. However, the bulking up process and a contract issue with the UFC delayed his divisional debut. Jon Jones has spent over 2 years working on his heavyweight body. According to Dana White, Jon Jones is ready to come back and make his heavyweight debut against the greatest UFC heavyweight, Stipe Miocic, for the interim heavyweight title. Regardless of whatever controversies he faced throughout his career, we can agree that he is one of the greatest fighters ever. Hopefully, we'd see him back in the octagon soon enough. Thank you for watching this video. That's all for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell.